Let me ask you something. Have you ever heard of something called Bionicle? Whoa, 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 hang on, whoa. Sorry, I gotta be careful. That happens every time you mention Bionicle on the internet. Okay, so, Bionicle. Where to begin? How about with this?
Strange canisters drift ashore on the island of Matanui. 6 legendary heroes have arrived. These mighty Toa must discover the masks of power, defeat evil, and free the island. 6 heroes, 1 destiny. Live the legend at Bionicle.com.
Bionicle represents a lot. It is one of the most popular LEGO themes to this day. It is one of the best-selling ever. It nearly single-handedly saved LEGO from bankruptcy. And there is a ton of lore. I'm talking characters, hundreds, thousands even, maybe, of individual plastic collectible masks, LEGO sets, movies, video games, books, comics, merch, so much merch. Most LEGO themes you think of as like a subset of LEGO. You know, I'm talking like LEGO Ninjago or, LEGO Knights Kingdom. When you think of these properties, first and foremost, you think LEGO. But Bionicle, not really the case. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First, at first glance, Bionicle doesn't really look like LEGO. I know technically it is LEGO. That's not what this is about. They were created to be this more kind of like action figures with a big focus on like posability, thanks to this handy ball and joint system. We'll get to that later. Bionicle also has its own deep lore that covers like thousands of years, like from the birth of a planet to the end of it or rebirth of it. Hundreds of characters, locations, power systems. If you want to get overstimulated, hop onto the Bionicle Wikipedia. Have a great time. And third, tonally, Bionicle was pretty dark for LEGO, especially for an original IP. I mean, there's like big themes of like hopelessness, faith, anxiety, possession, mutation, and of course, heavy violence and death. Like, for example, there's a plot line where the 6 main heroes are captured by these giant spiders. They're injected with venom, strung up in these spider webs in this abandoned city. And then the venom transforms them into it, and this is how the wiki explains it, horrifical bestial forms. And they literally rip out of their cocoons. You're not seeing that with Ninjago these days. So, how did we get here? How did LEGO transition from being very kid-friendly, very playful and positive into Bionicle? Something clearly aimed at an older audience. Well, thanks to today's guest, I got the answer. I'm Eric Crittenden, and before you ask, yes, my favorite Bionicle bad guys are the Paraka, thanks to this very special real rap that LEGO released about them. This is Clutch Power, a show about the ways we love LEGO.
The gang on the loose, nothing you could do. The beast on the move, bully coming through. Trigger, tracer, drifter coming through. Add the snake that makes Paraka crew. Yo, Paraka. Paraka, go Paraka. Paraka, go Paraka. Paraka, go Paraka. Paraka, go Paraka. Hey yo, go Paraka. Let's go Paraka. Hey yo, go Paraka, go Paraka.
Episode 5, The Man Behind the Mask, Creating Bionicle. A bit of a different format for this episode, only one segment for free listeners, the history of Bionicle, and an interview with Alastair Swinnerton, a writer who helped turn Bionicle into what it is today. Patreon supporters will get a bonus section at the end, a peek into the wild world of Bionicle mask collecting with one Garrett O'Donnell from the Atlanta Brick Co. He has turned Bionicle know-how into a job. I'm a real fan of this episode. Thanks in advance to both guests. They're very charming. You're going to see that for yourself in just a sec. So let's mask up and get going. It was the 90s, and Lego was not doing well. Profits had been dropping, Lego designers were retiring, the sets were getting weird and expensive and inconsistent. At the same time, a lot of other toy companies were getting worried about a new player in the field. Here's a Lego exec to explain it.
Video games were becoming much more popular at the time. You had a lot more engagement in digital media in the form of things like cable television and so forth. There was technology that was being incorporated into toys, things like Furby.
And hey, Lego tried the technology route too. We saw sets with micro motors and fiber optics, but as Lego's former chief marketing officer Mads Nipper once said, it was costing Lego more to source those parts than the price tag on the set the part itself came in. Which, I'm not a business guy, but even I know that's not great. YouTuber RR Slugger really put it well. When I had him on the show, he summed up the 90s as excessive.
Sets like the Interstellar Starfighter, it has a fiber optic system, a micromotor in there, it's got magnets, it's got heat-sensitive stickers, printing on every piece, like printing on all the figures, like it's just to the nines.
If you want to hear more about the weird sets of the 90s, check out the first episode of this show. Anyway, in 1998, Lego posted its first ever loss, so things at the company had to change quick. Lego started putting out licenses, which they'd never done before. We're talking Winnie the Pooh, Steven Spielberg movies like Jurassic Park, and this one movie called Star Wars. You might have heard of that one. But behind the scenes, Lego was still trying to cook up their own big hit. You see, while Lego Star Wars was popular, at the end of the day, they still had to pay Lucasfilm for the rights. If they had their own original IP, not the case. So one of those experiments from the 90s was something called a ball joint. Think of it like kind of your shoulder bone and socket. One piece has a ball, the other holds the ball, and the pieces rotate freely while still holding tight when you let it go. An art director named Christian Faber was working with these ball joints, and he started to use it for some offshoots of the Technic theme. There's this one called Slicer, and then one called Robo Riders.
And I would sort of take some Lego Technic bricks, and then I would sort of make this thought that what if we build characters instead of building cars and structures? So imagining if you could build a character, you could have the storytelling and the play.
And while there were characters in these themes, like Jet or Granite or Onyx, there wasn't really anything kind of tying them together. No one is writing fanfic about Granite and Onyx, not yet.
Trying to create something that was Lego's own property, but had the same sort of scale as Star Wars.
So luckily or unluckily, you'll see what I mean, Faber had a great concept rattling around in his head. In the 80s, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and he went through years of treatment for it.
I got these pills, I got these capsules that I was eating every day, and they were starting to, like an army of small medical soldiers going into my body and fighting this tumor.
Thankfully, by the end of it, he was totally fine, and he's still doing stuff today. So, great. He has a concept, we have the toy, we just need some way to kind of tie it all together. That's where Alastair Swinnerton comes in. At the time, he was a writer, and his portfolio included several animated TV shows. He'd made a name for himself in British television, and he'd just joined up with other British writers to start something of a guild. You know what? He tells it better.
So, a wonderful producer and I and Tony Barnes decided to set up a script writing company. Basically become a gang for writing scripts. It's essentially an agency, but we didn't want to be called an agency. We were just a script writing gang. So we had we asked a load of writers if they wanted to work with us. And we set up this gang and marketed ourselves at MIPCOM and Annecy Animation Festival, and because the golden rule was that writers didn't go to Cannes, but we did. Nobody could work out why. And then we figured, then we said, well, look, for every show that's being sold here, there's another one in development, and here we are. We write, hire us, and we got gigs from that. So we were all up in Edinburgh just for a gang meeting, if you like. This would have been the August. an email came through addressed to Keith Brumpton, with half a dozen one-page ideas on it from Lego, because Keith had worked with Lego. He hadn't. He'd worked with Bob Thompson at the BBC before Bob joined Lego. When Lego hashed all these one-pagers out internally, and they basically said, right, let's find some writers, because they'd never done external commissions before. Everything had always been developed in-house. So they had Bob. At that point, they didn't even have Vanessa or Michael Carrington or any of that. It was just Bob, I think. So Bob knew Keith, so he sent this, and he knew Keith was working with a bunch of other writers. So he sent stuff to Keith, to Scriptonite via Keith, and there was half a dozen one-pagers, except for Voodoo Dogs or whatever it was called. No, Voodoo Heads of Bonehead Island. That's the one. Yeah. Except for that one, which was 3 pages, I think. So we took we printed them all out. We took them down to the pub, like you do, and just sort of talked about them and went, okay, who wants to do which? And various writers picked various bits. And I went, I quite like the idea of this one, the Voodoo Heads thing, and they went, yeah, you take that. So I took that, 3.5 pages, I think it was. And I went, yeah, it had a kind of an Easter Island feeling to it. So I was always big into Easter Island, with the big heads and the what have you. So I took that. So the idea was we'd send our thoughts back to Lego, and they, if they liked what we said, they'd move it to the next stage, do a bit more development on them. So I did a little bit more than that. I sort of kind of took it, and I didn't rip it up, because the Christian's core idea, or at least what I later discovered to be Christian Faber's core idea, via Bob and Martin Anderson, was still in what I represented to them. But I just kind of mixed the whole Polynesian thing into it and changed the names of the characters and did the whole earth, air, fire, water connection thing that wasn't in there initially, and made it about. It was already about heroes, I think. I don't have a copy of Voodoo. One of these days, I'm going to get Christian to send me a copy of the original Voodoo Heads. I don't have it. I had a disastrous backup a long time ago and lost all the Lego stuff. I'm sure it's out there somewhere. But I've seen the original Bibles, because there are collectors out there who find these things in the dark corners of the internet and send them to me. Anyway, so I kind of rewrote it quite extensively and sent it to Bob, and he liked what I did, so he and I battered it backwards and forwards for a few months. It was still called Voodoo Heads at that time, and that, I thought, oh cool, how we go? I mean, I was paid to do some of this, so I thought, oh cool, we got a gig with Lego. Unbeknown to me, we didn't have a gig with Lego. There's only Bob and I knew about this. Lego knew nothing about what we were doing at all, until I got to Billund in the February. Until Ken and I got to Billund, we both went, and we got into this room, and there were all these execs there, not just Bob, and Martin and Christian were at the back playing with toys. But the main guy there was Eric Kramer, who was the head of something. He was basically the head of that particular division. Ken and I stood up against a whiteboard and said, right, what's this idea you've had then? I'd assumed Lego knew all about this, and it turned out not. I looked at Bob and went, have you not told them? No. So I had to repitch the idea that I thought Lego had already bought on a whiteboard at Lego. And as soon as I basically got to the Polynesian bit, Eric Kramer's eyes particularly lit up and went, ooh, because they'd been looking at a way of cracking the Far East market, because they never had. and they thought this might be it. So then it became, that was February 2000, I guess that was 2000. Yeah, February 2000. Then it became an official Lego thing, and then we started writing Bibles and all the rest of it. But up until that point, it was just me and Bob.
Yeah. Did the executives even know about like the original Voodoo Island idea?
Yeah, they knew about the original ideas that they'd sent out. I think another one of them became Knight's Kingdom. I think. What I don't know whether all 6 of them ever made it. Yeah, all these one-page ideas all came from this sort of development committee, if you like, of which Eric was the head. So yeah, they knew about the one pages. But as for the backwards and forwards process, they didn't know anything at all.
Were there any special considerations you had to make initially because this was a toy?
Yeah. I mean, no wheels for a start. Martin was adamant that there would not be wheels. This was not going to be a push-along toy.
Okay.
Yeah. No, 0 wheels. That was Martin Anderson's big thing. And obviously it was Lego, so there was no weapons initially.
Yeah.
Because Lego don't do battling figures. This one, they do did little cutesy things. And they had done Star Wars, obviously, which had weapons. So that was kind of a chink in the armor a little bit. So there was that.
Yeah.
But the initial, because I pitched 4 heroes, and I think it was Eric said, "Can you make it 6? Because we've got 6 color lines." I went, "Okay, I'll come up with another 2." So that's where ice and stone came into it.
I was gonna say those 2 always felt. I was like, "Isn't that water?"
Add-ons, yeah.
Yeah,
they were.
I always had trouble. Maybe I can get you to answer this. What's the difference between earth and stone?
Well, yes, it's semantics. I know. Well, you got, we need 2 more elements, but there are only 4 elements.
That's all the elements.
Yeah. Now there's earth being, the earth, the soil that we walk upon, and stone/rock being, the mineral. It's a big difference. Absolutely big difference. And ice is obviously different to water.
Yeah, it's frozen. It's frozen water.
Yeah, that's the main reason I had 6 color lines, because they wanted 6 color lines. Other than that, I mean, obviously they were wary about a story with conflict in it, and any sort of fighting. And they did resist for a long time, until between Bob and I, we came up with, Bob came up with the phrase. I mean, my initial thing was, well, okay, it's not, we're not killing people here. We're stopping bad guys, but we're not killing people. It's like Terminator 2. You blast a rock and the rock falls on them. You haven't actually shot them. It's the Terminator 2 theory. Yeah. But Bob came up with the phrase "smart heroic thinking," which was the most genius phrase I've ever heard, I think. And that was the ethos behind Bionicle, was smart heroic thinking. So your characters have to think their way out of problems, in a heroic kind of way. And that's how we progressed. That's how we went forwards with that mantra, smart heroic thinking.
So you were really fighting for more conflict in the Bionicle story.
Yeah. I didn't personally fight for it. Bob did all the fighting, if you like, and Eric probably. I think that team. I mean, Eric was at the head of that team, so he wanted this show or this product. So it was the people above him that Eric had to deal with. But he won them round. In the end, it got released, and then it went stratospheric, and they kind of went, okay, yeah, we'll do more of those. But we did, it wasn't. there was no, it had its own philosophy. There was no religion within it. There was no overt violence. There was good. It was good versus bad. But it was more about the people discovering who they are and where they're going and where they've come from, than it was about just plain old fighting bad guys. That was just a secondary aspect to it.
So you start working on the Bibles. Did they give you a timeline between you starting to work and then when they wanted to release?
Oh yeah. I can't remember what it was then, but yes, there were set deadlines that we need this by then and this by then. Yeah, no, there were they'd committed to it by then. There was a release date. So yeah, absolutely. And of course, it wasn't just me. By then, by the time they said yes, there was already a story department, and they started the games had started to be developed, even though the original game legendarily didn't get released. But there was a games department. There were toys, and there was a very set deadlines for the toy side of things, because you've got production lines, you've got buyers that need to see these things, and they need to see the marketing, and because the story was told not just within the toys, it was part of it was on the canisters, part of it was in the literature that came with them, part of it was a website you could go to. I mean, this was 19 when was this? 2000. Yeah. So I mean, the internet had been around for a little while, but it was by no means the internet that we know now. So having the story continued on the website, so every bit of this was part of the jigsaw of what the whole story was. So all that needed to be in place. I mean, that needed Bob managed an ever increasing team who were ever increasingly wonderful. So yeah, it stopped being about just Bob and I in that February of 2000. Then it became a huge team, and it hadn't been just Bob and I anyway. Obviously, Martin was already working on the toys, and Christian was already working on the amazing artwork side of it for Advance. So they were, but story-wise, it was just Bob and I initially, while they did things that I never got to see until later on. But I remember going to Advance for the first time and seeing the artwork that Christian and his team had come up with for the island and the characters, and and the movie posters, if you like, before it was even a movie. Because that was what Bob always said. What we're doing is we're writing a Bible for a movie that hasn't been released yet or hasn't been written yet. But that's what we're doing. We're developing a movie, essentially. So Christian had done these incredible pieces of artwork, one of which I still have somewhere. And so, but they were doing all that on one side while Bob and I were doing the story side. Yes, long answer to a very short question. Yes, there were a lot of restrictions on what we could and couldn't do, largely time related.
Yep. So how, from when you started working on the story Bible, or the Bionicle Bible, I guess?
Yeah.
Actually, at what point did it go from Voodoo to Bionicle?
Well, come February, they'd already ditched Voodoo. It didn't have a name at that point. So after the February meeting, everybody was sent away to come up with, including me, come up with a new name for it. But they came up with Bionicle internally. So by the next meeting, which I guess wasn't that long after that, they'd come up with Bionicle. Well, internally, I wanted to call my name for. I wanted to call it Evoids, evolving droids. That was my name for it, which I thought was very cool. And they went, "Yep, it's very cool. We're calling it Bionicle." I went, "Yeah, okay, yes, it's a good name," and it is. It's a great name. Bio Chronicle. That's what it is. Even though people insist on calling them Bionicles. which they're not. Bionicle is the overarching story. So yeah, by the second meetings, which would have been, I guess, March, April, something like that, 2000. That's what they were called because they needed a name for it for all the marketing stuff.
When you were writing the Bible, how much of what was originally in there from you actually was released? I guess because I mean there were so many different channels, but like
yeah, I mean I didn't. The story guys, took what I was doing, which was very broad stroke stuff, and they created the actual stories. I didn't write the actual stories of like scripts or whatever. They did all that because we weren't writing scripts. We were developing a world. We were world building. Unfortunately, there was no question of doing TV because they hadn't realized that in the UK, you can't do TV, or you couldn't then do TV direct from a toy line. Kids TV had to have been published in one form or another, a book first, or a comic, or anything, a piece of artwork, anything other than a toy. So basically, no toys on screen was the broadcaster's mantra at the time.
So you were building the world of Bionicle, or
yeah?
Did I use that? Did I use that correctly?
Yeah.
Is it fair to say the world of Bionicle?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what we were creating all the backstory, if you like. We were creating a backstory for a film that was yet to be written, and you got people like Greg, who was then doing all the story stuff and the comic book side of things. You had Leah, the head of the online stories, and a whole bunch of other people. So we created the backstory. It's like I wasn't the writer. That there was a whole team who then took what I developed, Bob developed, Christian, Martin developed, and made it real.
So before the interview, I spent maybe the last hour watching YouTube videos that were doing the summary of a story of Bionicle. And I was watching old commercials, and I'll be honest, it's a lot, and I feel like I couldn't describe what happens very well. But could you give me sort of the world backstory, like what you actually developed of Bionicle?
Well, there was the big secret, which isn't a secret anymore, and the whole, which is that Matanui, this world that they live on, is a giant robot, but that which crash landed onto this water planet and became the land. But it's a robot the size of a continent. But what the big secret in the early days was that this was actually a planetary evacuation craft. So a whole civilization was on board this ship, but no biological organisms ever survived. Well, we don't know whether they survived. They may still be in there. Who knows? At least I don't think Bob ever brought them to life. But the idea was that it crash landed, and the whole story from beginning to end was about the software trying to awaken the ship up. And so all the characters within Bionicle are in reality software and little robots and what have you. So they're all maintenance for the giant ship that is Matanui. Because of a malfunction within the software, these characters don't know who they are or what part they play in the whole thing. So they don't know that they're there to waken up this giant robot and to help, bring civilization out of cryo and to inhabit a new planet. They don't know any of this. They're from day one. They're trying to figure out who they are and how they relate to each other and why they're there. It's like you're dumping a load of Stone Age people on a planet and letting them get on with it. And over the millennia, they developed their own civilizations, their own mythologies. I don't think we ever said how long the robot had been there, but rocks had grown on it, so it had been there a long time. So that was the essence of it, and it was the essence of Christian's original concept as well. They're trying to figure out who they are and why they're there, and part of their ethos part of their myth, is that these great heroes will come down and save them and help them find who they are, called the Tower. And of course they do, in these big canisters that fly down in like flaming stars from the skies, but unfortunately when the canisters land, the Tower don't know who they are either, because they're ultimately all part of this mythology that they've essentially made up between them. But they know they're supposed to be heroes, so they go off and they be heroes, and they find bad things to right. And there's this overall bad guy called the Makuta, who is trying to take over Matanui. We don't never find out whether he's trying to destroy it or whether he's trying to become Matanui, whether he's trying to take it over. And he's not really bad. He's just, he and Matanui are sort of two sides of the same coin, if you like. That was always our plan, that he was they were yin and yang, but he just became, the Makuta became the evil character, because every story needs a bad guy. And we never actually saw him. There were no drawings of him initially. He was just like Sauron, he was just, a word, a name, a character. We never actually saw him.
Yeah, it took a couple of years before the figure of him came out.
I think it was after I left, actually, because I was kind of insistent that, not that I had any power over this sort of stuff at all, but I didn't want the Makuta, to be an action figure, because he was, as I felt, it would reduce his power as a character. But there were tons of Makutas in the end. There were little baby Makutas, and they were all over the place. Because these things happen. They're not set in stone. They have to evolve. Everything has to evolve. If you're going to run a series for 10 years or whatever it was, then you've got to change your mind occasionally.
Was the mask stuff in there from the beginning as well?
Pretty much, yeah. That was the collectible. That was because the whole reason they put out these one pages in the first place was because in '98 they made a loss for the first time in their corporate history, and basically Pokemon was wiping the floor with the entire world, every toy going, and they needed to fight back, and this Bionicle was the answer to Pokemon, but everything was about being collectible at the time, so that's what the masks were. I mean, there were Bionicle playing cards as well. We didn't want to just copy Pokemon because that we wanted to be better than Pokemon. We wanted to be the first Bionicle, not the next Pokemon. So, but yeah, the masks were a conscious effort to have collectibles, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it worked.
Yeah, it did.
Did you have like a "this is my creation" moment when you first held the actual Bionicle toy?
No, because it was all on paper. I mean, there were animated bits in the game, or the development game anyway. But it wasn't until, the movie was actually produced after I left, although I was still there. I tell a lie. But I wasn't, because it came out in 2004. Yeah, 2004, I think. Of course, it was made before I left. I was there at the premiere. What am I talking about? I was there. but I wasn't. I'd contributed to the story, but obviously I hadn't written the script. But yeah, that was it. But the thing is, that was 4 years later. So we'd kind of created 3 different worlds by then. Three releases. We had the original one, and then the Balrog, and then the Rakshi, and and the characters had already evolved by then. So they lived in our heads. I think by the time the movie came along, it was more of it wasn't what we had been working towards. We'd been creating a world. We hadn't been purely driven towards making a movie, or however many movies, 4 movies, I think it was in the end. So that wasn't, because that wasn't our goal. I guess I didn't have that moment with it. When I saw them on the shelves in the toy shops, yeah, that was the moment. That was the cool moment. In fact, the coolest moment was when it was Christmas. Would have been Christmas 2000. And Bob was in New York, and he sent me a photo from his phone of one of the huge advertising things on Times Square. It was New Year's Eve, in fact, not Christmas, and it was this massive Bionicle advert in Times Square. And he sent me a picture of it, and I went, "Okay, yeah." Now we've arrived. That's very, very cool.
Yeah. So how long were you working on that? 3 years, 4 years?
I left in 2004. So we started it unofficially in September 99. That was when Bob and I first started batting things backwards and forwards. And so I was trying to get my own half-hour Christmas special off with the BBC Tale of Jack Frost, which I did. Well, I did. The team did. The entire team who put that together and nearly killed themselves. But I just wrote the thing. But anyway, I was trying to do that, and I just didn't have the time to do, because Bionicle was getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was just becoming a full-time job. And I really had this. I wanted to make my snowman, basically. That's what Jack Frost was. That was my snowman. So I just reluctantly said, I need to do this. I can't do Bionicle anymore, because it's just taking over my life and my head. It's just getting huge. And Greg did a way better job than I did anyway. He curated it and expanded it, and yeah, Greg was Bionicle for many, many years after I left.
Yeah. So you saw it through, if I remember, like kind of that first big story.
Yeah. 3 releases and the movie. I mean, the idea of the 7th tower, the idea of a child being the 7th tower, that's what I brought to that film. So it was 3 releases and the genesis of the movie.
And I mean, Bionicle, in no small part, is, I'd say, a fairly heavy lifter for kind of helping Lego get out of those financial straits of the early 2000s.
Yeah, it did, absolutely. And that was, that was even more extraordinary that it did that. I mean, it made, what was it? I think it's something like $5 billion, grossed $5 billion, and they made 3 movies, however many it was. Yeah, I mean, that's wow.
It is really hard to overstate Bionicle's impact, but let me try. In the first year of Bionicle, It made Lego over $60 million. That same year, 2001, Lego received the Most Innovative Toy Award from the Toy Industry Association. By 2003, Bionicle was named the #1 Lego theme both by sales and popularity, and no other theme came close. That includes both Lego Harry Potter and Lego Star Wars, which is crazy to think of nowadays. By 2009, towards the end of Bionicle, 85% of American boys had heard of it, and 45% of them owned at least one set. And I was one of them. I got my first Bionicle at a consignment store. It was Tahu Nuva, which is a second generation Fire Bionicle. And from then on, I was hooked, man. I got dozens of sets, as the storyline went into the Toa Metru, the Viscerac, the Toa Hortica, and of course my boys, the Paraka. The first Lego set I ever bought myself with my own money was 8723 Peruk, which cost $4 at Walgreens, which, at the time was kind of a lot of money. I read the Bionicle books, the comics. I got the Lego System play sets. One of the 4 hats I owned had the Bionicle logo on it in silver. I had a crush on Gali, the only female Bionicle. After church, my friends and I would play on the playground as Bionicle, and I would, of course, pretend to be Liwa or Matau, the green guys. And then I just kind of lost interest. In 2007, Bionicle went underwater. I mean, in the literal sense, the storyline was like deep sea, and the designs just kind of didn't click for me. Bionicle would have 2 more years after this, 2008, 2009, but honestly, it had already kind of peaked. The final releases of Bionicle were a kind of best of, reimagined versions of classic Bionicle figures. And then things were silent. Until 2015.
New Lego Bionicle. Legend tells of a mask with unspeakable power.
Bionicle was back, baby. And it did not do well. The pieces were way too specialized. They weren't really part of the Technic system anymore, so you could really kind of only use the parts for other Bionicle from that line. Lego put out a few waves of these guys, and then it just kind of faded away. And that was it for Bionicle. You still see a few references here and there in other Lego sets, but it seems like people just moved on. There are still very, very, very vocal fans of Bionicle out there, and they really want Lego to start Bionicle up again, but I don't think that's going to happen. Bionicle came around in a very specific time in Lego's history. It was the perfect mixture of experimentation and desperation, and it helped get the company back on its feet. And these days Lego is they're good, man. They don't need a Bionicle level swing. They are sitting pretty on dozens of licenses and art pieces and botanicals and decorations. I don't think there's a place for Bionicle anymore, and that's okay. Things change, time passes. Like Maranui says in the final Bionicle book, all journeys must come to an end. All that has gone before has only served to give birth to this new day. And that's Bionicle. Up next, for Patreon supporters only, a look at Bionicle mask collecting. This stuff gets insane and expensive and very, very pedantic. For everyone else, that's our show. I want to start things off by thanking Alastair for chatting with me. He is a really sharp guy with so much work beyond Bionicle. It is one of his best shows is The Baskervilles, which is an animated show about a very, very nice family who moves to literal hell, like afterlife hell. It's great. Alastair's also written some novels, The Flying Monk and The Multiverse of Max Tovey. It's good stuff. And thank you for listening. This was a good trip down memory lane and pretty cathartic. You know what? I'm going to call my therapist and cancel our next appointment. I am good. Want to support the show? Please share it by word of mouth. Tell a friend, tell your online Lego buddies, and of course, following the podcast everywhere is a huge help. It is the same handle everywhere, clutchpower.pod. If you want to step up even more, become a patron. You will get extra content for every episode, along with a digital Lego mock I built specifically for that episode. Just like the content of this episode, the Patreon bonus build is a little different than my normal one. It is a map of Matanui, the island the Bionicle are from. and 6 masks for each of the original Toa. You can order the pieces for yourself on Bricklink, and then choose which mask you want to display out of the 6 heroes. I will be choosing the red mask, Tahu's, because, I'm a traditionalist. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a good night, and stay connected.